Civic Center LLC. This now being our fourth meeting. It started on, I think the first meeting was February 27th, 2024. I do want to note, Attorney Spadoni sent another letter, this being the fourth or fifth letter, indicating that he wants to continue his ongoing objection that board member Manzi, that he be recused from participating in this appeal. I assume, Mr. Manzi, your opinion, your decision has not changed and you wish to continue serving?
Nothing has changed.
Okay. I don't recall where we left off. I think we were still in Clark.
We qualified
The hydrogeologist, yes, that's right.
and then we cut it off without any substantive testing.
Okay. Any preliminary issues that come up between now and then? Okay. All right.
Thank you. Jeff, would you please describe your involvement with the special exception application that is the subject of this evening's hearing? And in addition, overall, your connection with the proposed development of the adjoining RPL property.
Okay, I've prepared a detailed hydrogeologic study to meet the requirements of the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection for a proposed community drip irrigation disposal field.
Can you describe in somewhat more detail what analysis you performed in connection with this study?
Sure. An analysis of the geology and hydrogeology of the subject site, installation and testing of 12 shallow groundwater monitoring wells, analysis of samples for background water quality, preparation of a groundwater mounting model, and development of a long-term groundwater monitoring plan to meet the requirements of the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection.
And you could probably spend 5 or 10 minutes on each one of them explaining it in more detail, but we're not going to do that. Is that right?
Well, I can go into that.
No, I'm going to get you there another way.
Okay.
Did you perform a hydrogeologic study and prepare or supervise the preparation of your report that is in our exhibit book? I believe it's exhibit 14, Valley Environmental Services, Inc., Hydrogeologic Report, August 7th, 2023, last revised February 22, 2024.
That's correct.
Okay. So please describe for the board the testing, the investigation that was performed, and how you analyzed the information that you obtained.
I assessed the proposed drip field area based on the areas determined to be suitable from the soil testing.
So that's what Joe Valentine came up with?
Correct.
Okay.
I supervised the installation of 12 shallow groundwater monitoring wells based on the anticipated groundwater flow direction in the area of the drip field.
And you picked the location of those wells, I assume?
Yes.
And that's based on what?
That's based on the anticipated groundwater flow directions coming from that proposed drip field.
Go on, please.
I measured seasonal high water levels in the wells and conducted 2 8-hour pumping tests to determine the aquifer properties underneath the site.
What does that mean, the aquifer properties underneath the site?
Well, that means the aquifer characteristics. One of them is transmissivity, which is the ability of the aquifer to transmit water. And the seasonal high water levels were measured in late winter, early spring, when water levels are typically at their highest.
And go on, please.
I collected background water quality samples from 4 of the monitoring wells.
That's pretty self-evident. You were looking
Correct.
at what's in the water.
I conducted a groundwater mounding analysis using the flow data provided by Fred Ebert and Joe Valentine, the seasonal high water levels in the monitoring wells, and the aquifer properties determined from the pumping tests.
We'll get into what the mounding analysis is in further questions, so please go on.
Okay, and the final aspect of the detailed hydro study is I prepared a long-term groundwater monitoring plan that's designed to meet the requirements of the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. The plan includes quarterly well monitoring beginning 6 months prior to system startup.
So that means if we get this approval and we get all the other DEP approvals and the system goes into operation, you've already preset, so to speak, a monitoring program to make sure that the system's working correctly.
Correct, and that's something that's with the detailed hydro report also reviewed and scrutinized by the DEP prior to approval of the permit.
Okay, let me ask you this, in layman's terms, is your analysis intended to make sure that there is adequate distance between the initial application of the wastewater and the groundwater so that we can be sure that by the time any treated effluent reaches the groundwater, it has been successfully filtered so as not to negatively impact the groundwater?
That's the purpose of the groundwater mounding analysis. The minimum separation distance required between the water table and the application, the drip irrigation field, is 4 feet to achieve additional renovation in the soil. With a drip irrigation system, that distance is from the surface 4.5 to 5 feet because of the depth of the drip irrigation tubes. So based on the mounding model, the calculated separation distance for the proposed drip irrigation field is minimally 8 feet, and that's at the time of the seasonal high water table in late winter, early spring. That means that we have 3 to 3.5 feet more clearance than required by PADEP. And again, that's just minimally. Many areas of the drip field, the separation distance is greater, up to 15 to 16 feet, again, at the seasonally high water table. During most of the year, for example, late spring, summer, fall, early winter, the separation distance between the calculated groundwater mound and the drip system is going to be much greater because the mounding model only shows the mound at that seasonal high water table period.
So, just so I understand this, what Fred Ebert described in his testimony was that the water coming, the effluent coming out of any of the buildings will first be pre-treated to get rid of anything other than something that can be treated biologically. Then it will go and it will be treated to tertiary treatment, very high level of cleaning up the water. And then it will come over to the spray fields, right?
Correct.
And if I understood Fred's testimony, that separation distance, whether it's 4 feet or 8 feet, is not necessarily being used to renovate or to clean that water because it's already as clean as we can get. Is that right?
Correct. The water is treated to some of the similar standards to drinking water standards. It's by no means drinking water. DEP doesn't consider it drinking water, otherwise it would pump it right back into the system. It is highly treated effluent.
Please explain to the board what you concluded with respect to the underlying geology of the property to support the proposed drip irrigation wastewater disposal field.
The proposed drip field can support the application of 123,516 gallons per day of treated effluent while exceeding the minimum required clearance above the water table and that is the 123,516 gallons is what the analysis was conducted at. The proposed usage, or the proposed disposal volume is 111,165 gallons a day, so we exceeded what the proposed disposal rate is.
So your study that I identified, 814, that was submitted with the planning module that Fred told us about and is intended to go to DEP, is it not?
Yes,
And that study is also given to the township staff and consultants, correct?
yes.
In your opinion, is the geology of the property we're talking about able to appropriately support the proposed drip disposal system while maintaining adequate separation between the bottom of the drip tubing and the top of the projected groundwater mound?
Yes.
So from your perspective, is there any reason to believe that the proposed disposal field will have a negative impact on the public health, safety, or welfare?
No, and I want to reiterate that the required long-term monitoring program is in place to verify any of the analyses that we've conducted.
I have no further questions for Mr. Clark.
I don't know, who wants to start? Mr. Blazy? Sure.
Mr. Clark, is it all right if I remain seated? I think it might be easier to get papers to try to. I'm very interested in where the water that is being dripped into the soil is going. So more of my questions are about the geology of the site and where the water is going and what that soil component is going to do. So just bear that in mind as I ask you questions. If I'm not specific enough or clear enough, I'll try to restate it, but I'm not a professional geologist, so my terminology is going to be somewhat missing. So I think you've answered my first couple of questions. You essentially have done this as a component of a DEP application to meet requirements that you perceive or believe they are interested in hearing about. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Did anyone give you instructions as to how to conduct this examination or report?
I've been doing these reports for 30 years.
You don't need it, huh?
I don't need instruction. It's a pretty standard formula for conducting these studies and providing reports.
And did you coordinate with, I think the other gentleman was Mr. Valentine who did the soil work, or Mr. Ebert? How did you interact, do any teamwork, if you will?
What happens is typically the engineer determines that, hey, we have this area that we're potentially looking at for a drip irrigation field. They define boundaries of the site. The soil scientist goes in and determines where there is suitable soil, and they come up with an area where there's potentially suitable soil for the drip irrigation. And then I take a look at it and determine if we can use all of that soil, or we have to cut back the dimensions of the field because it wouldn't work hydrogeologically.
And what did you conclude, and the proposed field, let me restate that. Did the proposed field work hydrogeologically?
The proposed field, actually, the soil, the suitable soil was a greater area than the hydrogeology would allow the system to work with the groundwater mounding model. So I actually cut back, I believe the original flow rate was 176,000 based on the initial soil work, and I cut it back to the 123,516.
And why was that? Now, explain, was that because of the geology of the site? And if so, what was peculiar about that geology that caused you to cut it back?
It's nothing with the geology, it had to do with groundwater levels. The seasonal high groundwater levels in some of the lower areas didn't allow for 4 feet of clearance between the drip tubing and the groundwater table.
So the area for the, well, I think you said it was 123,516 gallons per day was the design value?
That's the design value based on my analysis, correct? And that's 22 point, the number of acres.
Something like 568.
22.596 acres of the 89 acre property.
I'm going to later try to show some illustrations and ask you to point out where all this is falling. And maybe we'll first look at your report when we get to that, but okay. I wanted to just, I want to introduce my clients and their addresses because I'm going to be addressing the location of their properties at some point, and I want to share their addresses with you. One is Miss Sharon Duffield, and she resides at 554 Potomac Street. And the other two clients are Mr. and Mrs., it's Michael and Regina Onifrock, who reside at 43 Summerfield Drive. All of these homes are in Upper Mount Bethel Township. The Onifrocks directly abut the Angle Farm, and we'll look at some photos for that after. And Miss Duffield, I'll say she's a block and a half away. We'll look at the maps and see where she is. Did any of your work look at the surrounding properties and either the geology or the potential impact of the drip irrigation on the neighbors?
My work looked at where the potential discharge points were for the shallow groundwater system, which are the streams and the wetlands in the area. The requirement for the detailed hydrogeologic study only includes what the mounding analysis will do on the site and if there's any impact at the property boundary.
So when you say there's streams and wetlands on the property, is there a drawing either in your report that you can refer to and show us where it is, or perhaps I think it may have been Exhibit A6 report? What would you wish to refer to? And if you believe a relevant document, let me just say, is in somebody else's, like Mr. Valentine's, we'll look at it.
Can we have one question at a time, please?
Yeah.
Do you have the exhibits, the plans? It's the one that we had up.
You want the board?
Yeah,
You
the
want the
boards.
boards? Rob, I think we have the boards open.
That one, which is A11, and no, it's not that. That
We have A10 and A11.
I don't think those pictures that are open there.
yeah, those were from. How do you want to put these?
Well, I was gonna pull it back,
Well,
so.
why don't you put up the drawing that shows the area you investigated, and then we can make sure the board can see it, and then we can always turn it around and just do a quick retake so the audience can be aware of it.
This is the Exhibit A10, which is Figure 3 from my report, which is the groundwater elevation map, which shown in blue, brown, and green are the proposed drip areas of the site. The dashed lines are the groundwater contours. Water flow contours.
So this is not a mounding analysis at this point, so the flow contours are of,
This is the measured groundwater levels in, I believe, March of 2022, the seasonal high.
and how many groundwater measurements did you take?
12 wells
12
were
wells.
monitored.
And then, just, it'll be a future issue, but I think you said then you took test samples of 4, meaning tested the water components of 4 of the wells?
We tested water quality in 4 of the wells, correct?
Not all 12.
Not all 12.
Okay, we'll get. So could you, from this drawing, and I don't know how may I just turn it to the audience for a moment so they know what we're looking at? It might be helpful for them. This, for any of you that then has a booklet, I think you said was A10 in their booklet. And when we talk about the water contours, those are the black hyphenated lines. And then presumably the blue, green, and yellow are soil types, which we'll be talking about.
Those are the drip irrigation fields with the various flow rates based on the color.
Let me return this. Now, when you say the drip irrigation field, where do we see what the 22.568 or whatever, 22.6 acres is? Is it all of these, some of these?
It's all of them.
So the entire kind of irregular outline of those shaded, color shaded areas becomes the 22.6 acres?
Correct.
Okay, all right. And is it possible to see the Angle Farm property boundaries on this same exhibit?
That is on that exhibit. Those are the
What's it outside?
outline, this outline here.
Okay, and I see a bunch of much smaller squiggly lines, if you will, which I call topographic.
Those are topographic contours, correct.
Could you explain what they are and where the high point of this property is?
That is the ground surface elevation, and the high point is in this area where the highest topographic contour is.
So then,
Can we mark that some way or have a better identification in the record than that? Even if you put an X, it's really in that, the smallest circle, I think, on that drawing in the center of the property.
This is,
I at one point, Mark, did was trying to make a copy of A10, and I made a blow up, so we could use that, but it just shows that high.
Well,
It'd be better to use this one.
can we just clarify what he's identifying, the highest topographical what?
That's the highest topographic point on the site.
You mean standing on the land, what side, one of the properties?
Is it the same as the water level? The
Water levels, typically, the groundwater table typically is a subdued replica of topography, and in this case it is. So the groundwater contours typically follow the topographic contours just at depth. It's a subdued replica of the topography.
A lower version.
Yeah.
Now, I think this is my opinion, so I'll try to turn my opinion into a question, and you then correct me, okay? That you've not put the rest of the topographic lines that would drain to the, I think it's then the northwest. You're showing basically the drainage to the southeast, because that's where these fields would drain.
No, that's not the way that's not what the topography information or the groundwater contours show. Groundwater contours, the typical groundwater flow is perpendicular.
say that again.
Typical groundwater flow is perpendicular to the groundwater contours. So it would be this direction, that direction.
Oh, so up
These
here,
go down.
this would go in that,
Correct, following topography.
I see.
So you said, just to clarify, groundwater flow is typically perpendicular to what?
Groundwater contours.
dark dashed lines.
Okay.
But as I think I read this, most of the flow on A10 is going to the south or southeast. Would that be
Some of the
correct?
flow goes to the south or southeast, some goes to the east, some
Okay.
goes to the northwest,
Okay.
some,
And if
some
it-
goes to the west.
Now, if it were to go to the north, is that a steeply sloped area, and if so, of the farm, the Angle Farm, and what would happen to water flowing down that steep slope?
Water doesn't flow down the slope, water flows along the groundwater contour to the discharge point, which is a wetland at the property boundary.
So would you show us what wetland you're now referring to?
There's a wetland in this area.
Which would be,
Describe that in words for the kids so we can look at that later.
would be
A
the.
wetland is a groundwater discharge.
No, but where you're pointing to on the map.
Oh, on the west and northwestern side of the Angle property.
Doug, why don't you put a mark there, wetlands, something on that drawing?
You want me to write on it?
Yeah.
That would be what, the north,
And there's several other on the plan, I can remember.
Yes, I'd like,
On the south portion, there's wetlands and a stream on the east portion.
you know, where the stream on the east portion, where does that flow? Where does it originate as far as you know?
It originates up in this area, the northeastern portion of the plan, and flows to the south.
Okay, we'll try to have you locate then some of the properties that may flow through to see if we're talking about the same one.
here's my issue, how are we getting this, how are we submitting this exhibit? Are you giving me this copy and then that's what we're doing? I don't know how,
We'll, at a minimum,
we gotta figure it
we'll
out.
copy it. And that's, Mr. Blazy, will
I
take care of
I
that.
understand that, so, do we wanna mark this as one of your exhibits instead?
Well, this was in their
Was
exhibit.
10.
book, and that's
Yeah, it's
why-
already part of the record.
But it's been altered since it was 10, right? So now it should be a new exhibit, right? I mean,
Yeah. Well, I could call this, I guess, I think I'm up to I3, if you wanna make this I4, we'll have to make copies of it and distribute it to everybody as I4. And if we need to continue marking it up, we will.
So we're gonna call this I4 and it's the altered, what was it? Groundwater elevation map?
Yes.
Okay, and just to back up for a second, the discharge areas that you were marking, let's just identify those directionally on the parcel. Right, so I had written down that you, on the eastern portion of the parcel, there's a discharge area near a stream. I mean, I assume this map is north, south, east, and
Wait,
east.
Jeff, I think you better help with this.
Yeah, please, Jeff.
Discharge areas for the shallow groundwater system,
Okay,
streams, wetlands, springs.
let's start with the one on the east. Let's start there.
And there's a stream and wetlands on the
Okay.
east side of the property.
Okay, and then what's the next discharge area? You said there
And
was
where
no.
was the stream? I mean,
The stream is possible here.
So
I
that
think
was,
that red is the stream. It's not on this plan, but it's the stream.
And then I think you marked one on the south area?
There's a large wetland complex to the south of the site.
Bottom of the drawing.
Right, bottom of the road. And then, is there also one to the west there?
West,
Northwest?
northwest, there's a large wetland complex there as well.
and this is all northwest,
This-
or the
this-
direction?
These are all drained, the
And
wetland areas are all drained by the streams.
What does that, I'm sorry, would you explain it?
All the wetland areas, the wetlands form, and they're collect water, and the water is drained out of the wetlands through streams. stream channels.
So what you're saying is once there's enough water in a wetland area, it will accumulate and then flow into these
If
streams?
there's a discharge for that particular wetland, yes.
And does that all go to the south?
It all goes to the south, I mean, not on this plan, you can't see where everything goes on this particular plan because it's the plan of the site itself. But yes, it all collects, it goes down and eventually ends up in the Delaware River.
Now, is it your professional opinion that there is none of the natural water flowing on this property that is getting into deeper groundwater tables through rock fractures?
Some of it may, but the predominant flow is within the shallow groundwater system to these discharge areas.
And so roughly how much additional water are you adding to this 22.6 acre area?
We're
Now,
at-
if the normal rainfall in this area is 48 inches, how much is being added to that 22.6 acres?
Well, what's being added is 111,165
And what does
gallons.
that work out to in inches per year?
I haven't done the calculation for that.
Would it
It's
surprise you?
approximately 35% of, like, 135% of the, water for the entire 89 acres. It's an additional like 35%.
Or would it surprise you if we later, or our witnesses testified it's in the range of an additional 60 acres of rain falling on that 22.6 acres? of what's being 60
I'm going to
inches?
object to the question. Whether or not he's surprised is really not relevant.
Yeah, that's not, nothing's been introduced.
You mean 60 inches,
No,
not acres?
You object to it, we're just gonna move on.
So what surrounds this property, to your knowledge? What kind of use?
There are fields, there are residential properties.
And how are the residential properties receive water service?
They have wells.
And those wells are gathering it from where? What kind of aquifer do you expect them to be getting water from?
It's the aquifer, the deeper aquifer based on the Martinsburg Formation Shale.
I'm sorry, based on the,
Martinsburg Formation Shale.
And where could that water be coming from except from this property if this is the high point in the whole neighborhood?
That water comes from all areas around, any higher area to lower areas.
Right. But isn't this the high spot? Or is this just the high spot of the Angle Farm?
It's the high spot of the Angle Farm.
And what about the neighboring areas? Is there any other topographic high in the immediate vicinity that you're aware of?
Well, certainly there are higher areas, higher than the streams where the shallow groundwater discharges.
But would this property, the Angle properties, water falling on it, support those wells in the immediate neighborhoods next to it?
Possibly.
Well, if not them, where else would it be coming from?
Objection asked and answered.
I'm not sure, you can answer it again as far as I'm concerned.
Where else would what be coming from? The water to the
Where
wells?
else would their groundwater feeding the wells be coming from?
Higher elevations.
Would you actually, you had A14, I think. So I believe your answer, just so it's clear, is all of the color shaded areas of blue or green or I'll call it gold or black. Those are the areas for the proposed chip field. then?
Correct.
Okay. Did any, said you'd had 12 monitoring wells.
Correct.
4 of which were tested. Were any of these wells on private property other than the Angle Farm property, or were they all on the Angle property?
They're all on the Angle property. It's not a requirement of the DEP for this type of study to monitor or test any off-site wells.
Okay. So as far as you are aware, there's nothing in the DEP or your own requirements that require you to investigate and assess the likely impacts of your project upon its adjacent neighbors.
The DEP requires, not my requirements, it's the DEP requirements are that we assess the water quality and potential impacts at the property boundaries.
Okay. Did any area that you investigated for the field contain a surface layer of geologic till?
That would have been determined by the soil scientist. That would be glacial till, not geologic till.
Well, I'm referring now to your figure 2, and I think it's called the AA Drake base map. Could we look at that, please? And I guess my question is, does that base map, so this was in your report, I'm looking at figure 2 in your report, which is found at, I think it is A14, is that what it said?
Geological map, Potomac West Disposal Field.
Yes. Does that drawing you produced show a substantial expanse of glacial till to the north of the project?
There's some to the north, there's some to the west.
Okay. And is it the blue colored to the
No.
west that says QS on it?
The blue are defined as swamp deposits, that's the wetland area.
Oh, that's it. So where would then the glacial till be?
The orangish areas to the northeast and the west.
Oh, I see, okay. Yeah. And the one to the west is marked with something, a QG, is that the mark?
Correct.
Okay,
It's quaternary, which is a
okay.
period glacial deposits.
And can you tell us what the implication of that condition is in geologic terms?
Relative to the site,
Yeah,
nothing.
so it's irrelevant.
Correct.
For the area where it's found, what does it mean? It's more highly penetrable by water, or what? What is the implication of glacial till?
Glacial till can be intermixed, it could have higher permeability, it could have lower permeability.
And if a glacier covered this area and then eventually retreated from it, what is the rock formation upon which the glacier rested?
On the site,
What's the underlying rock?
Martinsburg Formation shale.
And what structural changes may have occurred in that Martinsburg shale due to the glacial impact?
I'm going to object, this seems way far beyond a direct examination.
But it's not way far off what he's got in his report, and that's why I'm inquiring about it.
So I think it's not part of the scope of my report.
Well, then what are the markings that you show, fracture traces, I think fracture traces are usually in bedrock, not in the soil.
Those are fractures in the bedrock, correct?
Right. And that's
Those are
what I'm
fracture
asking.
traces, those are linear features on the surface which may or may not represent fractures in the subsurface. It's one of the requirements of the DEP for the report that you identify potential fracture traces on your geologic map.
Okay. I'm going to, and what source or resource did you use for your figure two? If I may ask. So,
From Drake, 1969.
does it say that? Oh, yes, I see. From Drake et al. 1969, the
I can
bottom
read you
right.
the entire citation if you
Yep.
wish. Drake, AA, J.B. Epstein, and J.M. Aaron, 1969, geologic map and sections of parts of the Portland and Belvedere quadrangles, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, U.S. Geological Survey, miscellaneous geologic investigations. Sorry.
If you got that, you're unbelievable.
I warned you.
Yes, you
Yeah.
did.
Where do you need to pick up?
The survey, investigation.
U.S. Geological Survey, miscellaneous geologic investigation, map I-552.
I'm going to hand you extracts from another report that I've marked I-5.
You gotta identify, what is this?
This is the Kloth report that you also referred to, and I want to ask you some questions about. This is obviously a very limited section of a big book, as I understand it.
It's not that big. For geologic reports, is the,
You know what this is, Joe?
yeah.
I-5. And did I mark one of them I-5? I think I handed, it's fine. Do you recognize the excerpts that I placed here?
Yes. It's the geologic map plate from the report.
Okay, and I think if we get to the third page of the report, that's a blow-up of a portion of the second page diagram, if you will. That's my understanding. The second page is plate 1, and I think shows both these fracture traces in both Lehigh and Northampton County. And I'm trying to get on page 3 down to this site, this particular site, on your drawing.
Right.
So if you look at page 3, do you believe that describes the property that is shown now on I-4, or covers the geology of I-4?
I'm sure it's somewhere on there. You don't have this property identified on that.
No, but I was saying if from the topography, you could tell where it falls.
If you can.
It would take me some time to do that. It's not clear, based on this.
Okay, well, we'll try to make that clear when we put our witnesses on, and we can, we'll go from there. But is it fair to say that both the Drake report and the POF analysis say that the subsurface, my lay language, that the fracture traces don't follow necessarily surface features?
No, I wouldn't agree with that. Those fracture traces that are in figure 2 are my interpretation of fracture traces, not Drake.
Oh, so those are your placement of them.
Correct.
And how did you do that? How did you decide where to place them?
I look at aerial photographs. I do have an extensive practice where I locate water supplies based on fracture traces, where I use aerial photographs, stereo paired, and an old
I'm
World
sorry,
War
what was that?
stereo pair
Aerial
aerial
pair.
photographs, and an old World War II stereoscope, and identify fracture traces.
And fracture traces are on the bedrock, so you're making an estimate from looking at the surface pictures, right? Where the fracture traces
Correct.
may be.
On map, fracture traces are linear features at the surface which may or may not correspond to subsurface fractures.
So if you can only look at the surface and you see a linear feature on the surface, how do you know what the structure underneath, how it reflects the structure underneath?
Well, it's called a fracture trace and may or may not represent fractures in the subsurface.
Now I'd like you to describe your understanding of a limiting zone.
That's a soil term. I mean, you'd be better off asking the soil scientist about the limiting zones.
Okay. Is it true that it's a soil term, but isn't it reflect or relate to the amount of soil above bedrock? And it's my understanding that 9 of the 13 redox limiting zones were 24 inches or less. Is that something that you investigated, or would that been
That
Mr.
is something a
Valentine?
soil scientist investigated.
Okay,
My analysis is based on the soil scientist determining a drainage classification of the soil, whether it's deeply well drained, moderately well drained.
Mhm.
That was what my analysis was based on, the amount of flow determined by the soil scientist for that particular soil type.
Okay. All right. Let me see where your figure 1 is for a moment. Could you refer to figure 1, please? And you seem to, tell us what the markings, what first the yellow outline is, and then there are a whole series of A enumerations. It looks like it starts with,
It's a 1 to 12.
and so those would be your monitoring wells.
Those are the monitoring well locations, correct, and the yellow outline is the property boundary.
Okay. Now, as you said, your figure 2 is then again, you've positioned the site, and you've marked it the site, correct?
Correct.
And then what appear to be, well, what are those kind of blue lines outside it are the fracture traces you were marking, is that correct?
Correct, that's what's marked in the legend.
Okay. And now, if, I'd like you to turn to your figure 3.
Figure 3 is exhibit A10.
Of A10, correct. And that shows the groundwater contours, at least for a major portion of the Engelfeld property. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then, if you go to figure 4, what is that? Because those lines look different to me.
Figure
There's
4
a
is
whole bunch of red boxes on it.
Figure 4 is a depth to water map. So that's the actual depth from the ground surface to where the water was encountered in the 12 monitoring wells in March of 2022.
Now, don't most of your water wells have a water depth of 10 to 19 feet? And where would we find that data? Is that your table 1?
That data is table 1.
Wait. It's a compound question.
Yes.
Please ask them one question at a time.
What was the first question?
Doing some compound
So-
questions on that, but that's okay.
Yeah.
What was the first question?
Well, the first question was a statement about what the depths were, and then he went on and asked another question.
About the wells, right?
So now, so you've got 12 monitoring wells that you position, and you show us where in figure 1. You then, I think, repeat I think, and then you show the reports for those, monitoring those 12 in your table 1, is that correct?
Correct, and those are also located on figures 3 and 4, the well locations.
Okay, and then, what does monitoring well A8 show you with regard to the depth of the water table?
The depth of the water is on March 10th, 2022, was 2.36 feet below the ground surface.
Now, would that be an acceptable place for a drip irrigation?
No, and that's why I backed off the location of the drip field from those areas.
And how would we tell that you backed off from it?
From the figures in the report, you wouldn't, because only the final drip areas were presented. That's what the DEP wants to look at.
Well, when I look at A8 on your figure 1, I'll call it in the lower, well, it's the south kind of west corner of the farm property.
Right.
And I think then what you're saying is you didn't use the southwest corner of the farm property for any of those proposed field areas.
No, there were suitable soils there, but we didn't use that because we couldn't achieve the proper clearance with the groundwater mound in those areas because of the shallow water.
But I thought I had understood your earlier answer to be that all of these, all the colored areas were the proposed drip irrigation.
Those are the currently proposed drip irrigation areas, correct, but those are not the entire map suitable soils.
So you're saying the colored area is more than the 22.6 acres?
No, you're saying that. That is the 22.6 acres.
Well, I thought all of that was proposed for drip irrigation.
It is.
Well, then you just said you took the
No, that's not what I said. What I said was that they had map suitable soils in those lower areas, and I backed off where the proposed drip field could go because the water levels were too shallow to achieve the 4 feet of clearance.
Makes sense, so where did you back, on this drawing, where is the backing off occurring? Or should we turn to your exhibit 4?
It's not on the exhibit. That's the exhibit, figures 3 and 4 in my report, and figures A10, or exhibits A10 and A11 are based on the final determination of where the drip field was going to be the 22.596 acres with a proposed flow of 111,165 gallons per day.
So then what is the A monitoring well A8 is not in the colored area,
It is not, no.
so that's out of it.
all of the wells, or most of the wells should be out of the colored areas because you're not supposed to have your monitoring wells within the drip field boundaries.
Okay. Now, can we look at your mounding analysis for a moment? We're going to read this figure 4 in your report. Could you tell us what a mounding analysis is and how now the red overlays relate? The lines are different. and
Figure
why?
4 is not a mounting analysis. Figure 4 shows the black dashed lines are the depth to water on March 10th, 2022 below ground surface. The red boxes are the model boundaries. The model was done in 3 pieces because the groundwater is flowing, shallow groundwater is flowing in 3 different directions. So the model areas were based on modeling flows to each different direction that the shallow groundwater flows. There's no results for the modeling analysis on this figure.
Well, why then are the hatched or dashed black lines look quite different from those on figure 3?
Because those are depth to water contours versus groundwater elevation contours on figure 3. They're completely different.
And is that based on the assumption that the drip irrigation field is in operation, so it's accepting the water? And
No,
So what's causing the mounding?
there is no mounding shown on this figure.
Well, your figure 4 says depth to water and mounding model map.
Right. Those red rectangles are the modeled areas. That's just identifying where the modeled areas were.
Okay, and let's look at the red and then we'll come back to the black. If you look at the red one on the left, there appears to be an arrow, to me, heading down to the south. Is that the direction then? You're saying
That's the direction of groundwater flow within that model area.
that model area. And then on the far right, there's a narrow red box, and that, I think, has an arrow pointing more or less to the right,
To the east
to the east. And so that would be the direction of flow for that.
in that area, correct.
And then, likewise, the one on the north of the drawing looks like it's flowing to the northwest. There's an arrow, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. We're gonna look at,
Just to clarify, you're saying that's the direction of the groundwater flow within those boxed in areas?
Correct. And that's the way the model sees the direction of groundwater flow.
The model is a computer model,
Correct.
it's a program.
It's a program.
now, maybe I don't, why are the black hatched lines in figure 4 appear to be of a different shape, quite a different shape than those in figure 3?
I'm gonna object, that question's been asked and answered.
No, I don't think so.
It was, but go ahead, answer it again.
Those are depth to water contours on figure 4 versus the groundwater elevation contours on figure 3. They're totally different. The groundwater, that figure 4 is the depth from the ground surface to where the water is. The figure 3 is the elevation of the groundwater above sea level. They won't necessarily look alike. They mostly never look alike.
Well, here's part of my problem is, you showed, I think, in monitoring well 10, a 19-foot depth. And as best I can read your A10 exhibit, the mound shows at a depth of 20 feet. So why is the mound deeper or lower than the groundwater model, than the groundwater level of 18? Or 19, I'm sorry.
Because
Monitoring well 10 says it's 19 foot.
that well is between contours that are 15 and 20.
contours. So that's below the surface, and yet you're saying the mound is at 20 feet below. So,
No, there's no mound shown in this figure.
I thought in figure 4, okay. We'll read the record and we'll figure it out from the record. Let's see if we can try to now orient this to a couple of properties. We only have 2 of these, one of each. They're prepared by the township, and we're prepared, I think Commissioner Friedman, the gentleman's name is here, so if we need to authenticate them, he can, and their counsel help produce them. And I'll explain
Who did? Who produced them?
The township?
the township.
This was not prepared for this, if I may, this was prepared at the request of the township supervisor a year ago, and thought it'd be useful because it shows the properties around.
It shows the neighboring properties, which I want to orient toward to these things and why some folks are concerned about it. So these were township maps.
How are we marking these? What do you want to do?
Well, I guess we're up to, you want to mark them for
Yeah,
township
no,
purposes?
is it
or
just-
mark-
They're for your-
Are those maps just this area or your other maps?
I-
Are those maps just of this area or your other maps of the township?
Let me put it up and show you, and I'll show you what I understand it to be.
It's just in this area.
It's essentially this area, but larger than just the property. So if you look at
Wait a minute.
this drawing.
Wait, just excuse me, but you've got an obligation to identify what they are and not from your testifying as to what they are.
This is identified as an RPI drip irrigation area map 1. And I don't,
We're gonna call
there's
this,
a date on it of November 14th, 2022, prepared by Carroll Engineering Corporation. It was apparently at the request of the township.
and we're gonna call this I-6?
Yeah.
Okay, and read that again, what was it called again?
RPL drip irrigation area map 1. Carroll Engineering Corp. The project number, if you want it, is 171162. And the date is November 14th, 2022.
Okay.
I'm going to object to the introduction of this. This is classic hearsay. You can't just take somebody else's map and put it up and say that it says something or other. You need somebody to authenticate.
What is the purpose? Where are you going with using these maps? Is this just to identify the neighboring properties?
Yes, and then a blow-up of that is this one, which is called area map 2. Again, RPL drip irrigation area 2, area map 2, I apologize. Again, Carroll Engineering Corp. It's the same project number. The date of preparation on this one is June 9, 2023. So to me,
It's hearsay, Doug.
It appears to be an aerial photograph modified into a map.
Right, but, and that's why I'm asking you, is the purpose just to identify the properties?
the
Because
property
I
is
think
not
I'm gonna,
where the
I-
neighbors live.
here's what I will say, though. I think if it's just to identify the properties where the other neighbors live, then I think we're okay moving forward.
If
If
that's
it's-
all it is, and it's,
Let me finish, Mark. If it's to use any of the different colors and to try to ask questions about what those mean or anything else like that,
No.
I'm gonna have to sustain that until you
No,
lay a
I agree
foundation
with
for
you.
it. Okay,
I'm just
okay,
trying to locate the neighboring properties
okay.
in relation to.
If this witness can, is what you're saying.
Well, yes.
Okay.
So if we now look at.
give me 1 minute, please.
Sure.
What is this called again, Doug? I'm sorry? No, that's I-7, but what's the second one called?
RPI drip irrigation area.
Because
to-
did he do a report?
I'm sorry, I misspoke.
Yeah, yeah,
I
okay.
don't know, maybe it might be or something.
And here's what I'm gonna ask, is that at the end of this, Doug, just because we're jumping around, I'm gonna need an index of your exhibits and then copies, because obviously I can't take these two here.
I can provide a PDF copy.
Of these two, okay, and then if we're gonna use the modified version of A10 as your I4, I'm gonna need you to somehow make a copy of that. I'm okay if it's a picture, but I gotta make a record of this, and,
Let's- My suggestion would be, when the hearing concludes, let's take them and we'll see whether I should get a copy, which I'm happy to do, or Mark prefers a copy of his, and we'll figure that out. And I'll clearly provide, the township is willing to provide more copies of this.
It's not the copies.
Oh,
I'll go along.
see where it goes, and then.
Yeah, exactly.
now, I guess the core, like, if we were to look at your, see, I think figure 3 is just a little, well, no, figure 4, I want to use, your figure 4. Can you identify what would be the angle property on this drawing, which we're calling I-7?
I7 is the first, was the top one you have there.
That is this area in the center of the photo.
Okay, and as I then look at your, I think you called this red.
Nobody can, we can't understand what you're
Let me ask this, can we take a 10-minute break and stipulate to where these properties are and who they are? Do you have, I mean, this is not
I
something.
have no idea where he's going.
And that's what I'm saying, if you're just trying to identify where your client's properties are in relation to this.
What I'm trying to
Sorry.
understand, I can
I
do it
think we
pretty
can
simply,
stipulate.
where would any part of the Angle Farm property drain towards this Summerfield Drive area of homes, or the homes immediately above it? Because I read your graph. as saying that-
Let him answer that question.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Okay, and then, would there be any other what properties would there be to the north? You had a portion draining to the north. Would that cover any of these to the upper left of the Angle Farm property?
The discharge area is the wetland, and that's where it would.
And where's the wetland, if you can see it on this
The
map,
wetland is on the western portion
of the Angle
of the
Farm?
Angle Farm.
It's a darker colored green, okay, would discharge to the wetland.
I'm sorry? Was that a correct?
Yes.
Now, for the properties to the, what I'll call the south of the Angle Farm property, would the water drain to any of them, or is there an intervening stream or wetland?
Are you talking south other than the Summerfield ones?
Yes. the
I
Summerfield
consider that south, so,
Yes, the Sum.
okay.
It depends what you're talking about draining, whether it's from the existing Angle Farm itself now, and farm fields, or the drip areas, the proposed drip areas.
What was due from the farm field now, because that's the conditions now.
Correct, well, the farm field drains the areas that topographically grade to the south, drains to the south. The groundwater drains, shallow groundwater drains to the south for that wetlands complex of
Which
the
is
southern
that like-
portion of the site.
That thumbprint kind of
I'm
thing,
sorry,
so?
I'm sorry, you can interrupt with him,
I'm sorry.
and Jeff, if you could kind of turn, yeah,
Sorry, the wetlands complex on the southern portion of the site.
okay.
And then, all right. So there is a wetlands portion on the southern area, is that this thumbprint insert?
That's what you want to call it,
I
yes.
don't know how else to describe it. Okay. And does that continue, the wetlands outside?
Portion of the wetlands continues outside, and then it drains through a stream to the south and southeast.
Thank you.
Yeah, can we take a, that's okay, Doug, if you're okay there, take a
Yeah.
5-10 minute break?
Yeah, yeah.
Morning, Doom.
Mr. Clark, gi- given the declining terrain to the southeast of the proposed drip irrigation field, do you expect to see lateral surface breakouts of water under current conditions?
No,
And where then is that water, where will it manifest itself? I think you've answered this, but let's just,
within the shallow groundwater system, the discharge is along the shallow groundwater flow paths to the streams and wetland areas.
and if the water discharge increases with the drip field, will the destination of that water be the same places? But just more of it, or what?
In general, yes.
I'd like to now talk about the possible contaminants already in, I hope they're not, but that might be in the water table and possibly being added. Did you take any, was one of your 4 samples to the, I guess it would be the southeast of the property where you actually did the monitoring? And point us to the chart that would show the results.
Yeah, which 4, if you could, which 4 wells were actually tested?
A1, A3, A6, and A11. North, south, east, and west.
In that order? So A1 was north?
North, east, south, and west. A1 is north, A3 is east, A6 is south, A11 is west.
Wait, say that again. So A1 is north,
A1 is north,
yeah,
A3 is east,
yeah,
A6 is south, A11 is west.
okay. So then to the, so if we, where would we find the results for the sampling for A6, which would be to the southeast?
Table 3.
All right. I believe in your, let me find the reference, I apologize. I think if you go to page 12 of your report, you, or it's, just give me a moment. Yes, beyond page 12, but the heading is 8.3, water quality monitoring, which starts on page 11. See that?
Yes,
And
that's
then-
part of the long-term monitoring plan.
Okay, and then it says at the bottom of your text, on top of page 12, the water samples will be analyzed for the following parameters. And then there's a list. See that? With
Yes.
bullets? And the 4th one down is total phosphates. So now let's look at the results of your, were those results for, is it A6 are reported? Because A6 would be the one to the southeast, right?
Can we get a question?
Yes, the question is, you're gonna monitor for phosphates, and tell me what the results for phosphates were on your table 3 lab summary.
You're comparing apples to oranges. The requirements for the background monitoring for the detailed hydro study by the DEP are different than the long-term requirements for monitoring over the long term.
So you're saying what you reported on page 10 and 11 is something that would be done for the long-term monitoring,
Correct.
and that what was done and reported in, on table 3 was just your initial sample
Correct, it's just to
results.
get a snapshot of what the water quality is now. The long-term monitoring, and we only sampled 4 wells, just to get a snapshot of what that water quality, what the water quality results were. Part of the long-term monitoring program, I've recommended 9 of the wells that are down gradient, not 4, but 9 of the wells as long-term monitoring wells. 6 months prior to implementation of the system going online, they're required to start quarterly monitoring to collect background of the parameters that are shown on page 12 of the report.
And is it your answer that the DEP did not require phosphates for purposes of your application to the DEP?
Correct.
And, okay.
The answer is because the background phosphates will be identified, that parameter will be identified prior to system startup.
And still on monitoring, but a different question. What about other toxic materials, potentially metals, pesticides, semi-volatiles, other things that aren't now tested for by way of establishing background? Wouldn't that be in your interest as well as?
I'm gonna object. You haven't established what the background check is, and now you're saying something's not there. You gotta lay a foundation.
Well, apparently, the only objective is to meet the DEP requirement.
That's not what I see here, Doug. He's got a chart here of A3 that shows what the current condition of the water is. And you haven't asked him a question about that.
We're not talking about A3, we're talking about A6 for the moment, which is to the southeast, right? But it's the same thing, you tested for the same parameters in all the wells.
All 4 wells,
All 4
correct.
wells. And your intention for the future is to add at least one parameter, phosphates, for all the, I think you said 11 wells or 9 wells you were
9.
gonna monitor, or recommending monitoring.
Correct.
And is there a reason you didn't test for other possible contaminants? And if so, what's that reason?
It's not required by the DEP.
I'm sorry that you didn't test. Are you talking about the test now or the test in the future?
Either or both, so, I mean, it's not required, I think, for right now.
You haven't established or asked him about what did he find in the testing of the 4 wells that he tested and is in his report.
You can ask him about it if you wish, I don't.
Well,
I'm asking
you-
about things he didn't test for.
Well, you're just not laying a foundation on which to ask your other questions.
Did you make a judgment or reach a conclusion as to whether or not this sequential batch reactor process would reduce or improve nitrate levels in the neighboring domestic water supplies?
The required treatment for this site is nitrates at 10 milligrams per liter or below. Currently, under current conditions, the 89 acres is farmed and has been for 100, 150, 200 years. I don't know how long that was, at least back to 1938 when I saw an aerial photographs. However, that entire time, whatever manure, fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides that have been put on that site or were put on the field, what we identified in the testing is that the nitrate values in the wells average about 11.4 milligrams per liter, which is above the drinking water standard of 10. What the DEP requires is that the proposed drip field can't increase the nitrates at the property boundary above 10 milligrams per liter. Since they already are, they have to treat the effluent to a 10 milligram per liter or less standard. So what happens when instead of farming 89 acres, they're only putting drip irrigation on 22.596 acres, and the rest of the property will no longer be farmed, no longer have application of fertilizer, manure, that the nitrates typically go down. And that's what we see in systems like this that are placed on agricultural fields and that they are using effluent, either spray or drip irrigation, that what we see in the long run is that the nitrate levels at the property boundaries decline. Because you no longer have the source of the nitrate.
Well, I thought you were saying all the water generated on this property is not going to the neighbors, but is going to wetlands or streams. So why would you be assuming their nitrate levels, if their nitrate levels are high, is there any reason to think it's not due to the farm field above them right now?
Well, I would think that a lot of the areas around here, because it was farmed for so long and so much nitrate was put on, that the nitrates are high in the groundwater in the area,
In general?
in general.
But I thought your earlier testimony suggested whatever you're doing in the drip irrigation field will have no impact on the neighbor's groundwater because it's all departing via the streams or the wetlands.
No, what I said was the shallow groundwater system discharges to the streams and wetlands.
Yeah. Well, is there any likely impact from this project then on any of the neighboring properties?
Yeah, the nitrate levels should go down over time.
And why, if that water doesn't get to their wells?
I didn't say the water doesn't get to their wells. I said the nitrate levels in the area should go down over time.
Well, earlier in your testimony, I thought you did say the water would not get to their wells. They were not receiving deeper groundwater from this property. They were receiving it more generally, but at least, and that all of the drainage was going to the wetlands or streams that.
No, you asked the question of whether any of the water entered the deep groundwater system, and I said a portion of it may, but predominantly the groundwater flow in the shallow groundwater system discharges to the streams and wetlands.
So there may be some deeper groundwater impact from the drainage.
Flow, not impact. I
Pardon?
wouldn't characterize it as impact, I would say flow.
Flow, all right. So some of the drip irrigation flow, as well as natural rainwater falling on that property, may flow into the deeper aquifers, and therefore be accessible to neighboring wells.
They may or may not be accessible to that, yeah. They may or may not be getting water from those zones. We didn't do a study to identify that.
Okay. Okay, I think that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Adrian.
So I have a few questions, not a lot. So going back to your selection of the monitoring well locations, could you just tell us generally how you selected those sites?
We look to distribute monitoring wells, a number of monitoring wells around the site to, in areas that were down gradient areas, and try to distribute those evenly around. Some of the wells would be in up gradient areas, and some of the wells are in down gradient areas.
And going back to your figure 4, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I just need a clarification. I think your testimony was, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the 3 different models were done because water flows generally in 3 different directions here.
Correct.
And that sort of, there's a lighter, maybe pinkish color that is identified on the chart as approximate basically where the water will start to flow in one particular direction on the map.
Correct, and that's based on topography.
Okay, and that was my next question. Okay. You mentioned earlier that DEP wants to know where the fracture traces are, Megan.
That's
they
correct.
wanna know. What's the significance of that to DEP?
There's potentially flow, preferential flow along those fractures.
I'm sorry, what kind of flow? Preferential?
Preferential flow along those fractures. Along fractures, not those particular fracture traces.
So that whenever you do these kind of modeling, surveys, that's what they want to see when they.
Correct.
Okay. Just want to ask you some questions, I actually do want to ask you questions about the results, so that I can understand it. So if we go to that table 3, where you have your, I think you call it a snapshot of the water quality at the time that you tested it, correct?
Correct.
And that testing was done, is that 2/14/23 date, does it relate to the date that the testing was performed?
That was the date the testing was performed.
Okay, sorry. And just so I understand the actual chart here, table 3, the reporting limit is reflective of what the maximum of each one of these parameters should be.
No, the reporting limit is, I'm sorry, yeah, you're correct, that's what the limit is.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about nitrates previously, and you talked about that.
I'm sorry, let me correct myself. The reporting limit is the lab reporting limit. That's the minimum value that they can determine a parameter. For
Okay.
example, nitrate, their minimum parameter is 1 milligram per liter.
Okay, so that doesn't tell us what the maximum allowable.
What the standard is?
Right.
No, the standard for what's important on this chart is nitrate is 10 milligrams per liter is the
Okay.
drinking water standard.
All right, so I want to ask you about some of the other things that are tested for here. Chlorides are one of the parameters that you're testing for, and what is the limit for drinking water for chlorides?
Off the top of my head, I believe it's 250.
Okay, so the levels that were identified in the testing are well below that, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I could go through each one of these, but apart from nitrates, which are all above, at least on average or above what the limit of drinking water is, were there other parameters that were tested for which were above the limits?
Manganese is in A3.
Okay, and what is do you know what the standard is for manganese?
Off the top of my head, I don't, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I don't know.
But whatever you tested there, that was above those limits?
Right, again, those are drinking water standards.
Okay. Well, you mentioned previously that over time, the drip irrigation system and no longer farming it, no longer putting manure on it, your testimony was that would lower the nitrate levels generally, that's what you expect to see.
Correct.
Does that hold true for manganese as well?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay, and why is that different?
It's not something that we normally test for or normally track because it's not something that's part of the effluent.
Okay. So but you tested for, you made that determination in this case, or was that required?
Well, it's a required testing parameter,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
But it's not something that we typically track in when we do the long-term or the what's called a comprehensive groundwater evaluation, which is done at a 5-year interval, and looking at the parameters. We particularly look at nitrates.
Okay. Were there any other parameters here that were tested for which you found results were above the limits?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And just to be clear, these are what are required to be tested by DEP?
It's required to be tested, and again, it's not drinking water, so it's not held to a drinking water standard. Those are just the, what you're talking about are drinking water standards.
Okay. Well, I wasn't talking about any particular standard, you brought it up, so I was just asking in reference to what you identified as the standard. And is it fair to say that beyond what DEP requires you to test, you didn't do any additional testing?
No,
No, you didn't do any
we did not do any
Okay.
additional testing, no.
additional. All right, that's all questions I have, thank you.
Who's the first with party status that wants to ask this witness questions, if anyone? You don't have to.
That sounded like you wanted nothing.
Well,
I just have a quick question.
Okay, hang on, state
Do I-
your name.
can I-
Yeah, come up here, state your name. Yeah, can we move, yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Name again?
Joe Tripoli, 65 Sunrise Boulevard, Mount Bethel. Did you say that you were gonna pump 123,500 gallons a day
It's,
over there?
it's 111, 165 gallons a day. The model was run at a value of 123, 516 based on the amount of soil. The difference was explained by Mr. Ebert, whereas there's approximately, he figured a 10% loss over the design and implementation of the system.
So what would the number be per day?
111,165 is the peak.
65 gallons per day.
Correct.
Well, I was sitting back there and I just Googled the average household use per day, and it's 300 gallons a day,
Give or take.
give or take. I just Googled it, just average. So the houses on Potomac and Sunrise are drawing 300 gallons a day, but the water that you're gonna draw is 111,000.
No, this is water that's placed on the site as recharge. That's, water's not being removed from the site.
Okay.
That's water being put on the site.
Okay, well then, when the developer originally made the proposal, he handed out this drawing, which I had to go and buy a $20 magnifying glass to read it. But,
I couldn't see it either, though.
yeah, I can't even read it with the magnifying glass. But if I'm reading this correctly, it's showing two proposed, I'm gonna read it here, two proposed wells. Is that true?
Do you know if there are two proposed wells?
As far as I know, there are no proposed withdrawal wells on the property, subject property.
No, that's
Whoa,
not
whoa, wait a
true.
minute.
We have drilled 3 potential well sites on our property.
Not on the Angle Farm.
Not on the.
No,
I'm talking about the Angle
No,
Farm.
no.
This drawing, which is CD-1000, which I think is replaced with SK1, which I don't have a copy of, but it looks exactly the same as SK1, which Doug has, and it shows 2 proposed wells here. Now, these wells are gonna draw water for the development, right?
We're not, I'm gonna object to the sign question.
Well, I'm just trying to find out how much
Excuse
water
me.
is gonna be
Excuse
drawn
me.
from the aquifer that we use.
Excuse me.
Okay.
We're not here about wells, whether they're good or bad. We're here about one limited issue, and that's whether or not we have the right to discharge the treated effluent on the 22 acres of the Angle Farm.
So I can't ask if this water expert can tell me how much water is gonna come out of the aquifer?
It's not relevant to tonight. It might be relevant to something
All
else.
right, well,
But it's
that was
not
the
relevant to
question
this.
I had. Okay, thank you.
Give an opportunity to ask the witness any questions.
He's not a witness, he's a party. You wanna call him as a witness, call him as a witness. This is why I said I didn't wanna have this, but everybody wanted to be one, so.
Fred Clark, Crystal Parish, Summer Mount Bethel. I just have a couple of simple questions. On the fracture traces, Can the water, if there's a fracture, will the water go, you said that that'll provide preferential flow, all right, on a fracture, that's one way they affect the hydrogeology, is that correct? Okay. If a fracture is open, does water come up through them?
If it is a groundwater discharge zone versus a groundwater recharge area.
Okay, so fractures can allow water to come up and water can flow down, like groundwater. If it's over an aquifer, can water come up through a fracture?
Sure, depending on where it is topographically
Okay,
and geologically.
and water can also follow a fracture, is that true?
Yes.
On the discharge?
Yes.
Okay. So there was a pretty significant earthquake recently, April 5th in New Jersey. Is there any chance that would have changed the bedrock characteristics of your test area?
No, it's not.
All right, okay, it's unlikely. So no testing would have to be done?
No.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Any other individual with party status have any questions for this witness?
If not, I'd like to ask a question, Jeff.
All right, sure.
I get to face the person that's asking me a question now. I like this much better.
I need you to help me with something that I don't understand. At the beginning of the night, we talked about mounding. What's mounding?
Groundwater mounting is that we're adding 111,165 gallons a day. The water table is currently at an elevation that's shown, at least during the seasonal high period in late winter, early spring, as shown on figure 3. So that's the groundwater elevation. What happens is, as you add the water from the drip irrigation system, it will create a groundwater mound in the area of the drip field where the groundwater table will rise based on that water being applied to the drip irrigation system.
Okay, so the mounding actually is a term of water coming up.
Correct.
Okay, so 17 and a half, 24.8, that's the nominal, I'm sorry, that's on figure 3. That's the nominal height or depth of the water.
Want me to get to the figure?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm on table 3.
Table 3, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is the shallow groundwater, correct?
Right.
Correct. No, it's not. Table 3 is, the water level shown on table 3 is the water level that was measured on February 14th, 2023.
Okay.
That's not the mound.
But when mounding occurs on A1, that water level will rise?
Potentially, yes.
Okay. Is there a way to predict how high it will rise, or is
That was the purpose of the groundwater mounding analysis. That's what it did.
Okay. So that determines our prediction in terms of the height of the water.
Correct.
Okay. I got it. Okay, thank you.
It would be, I'm sorry, it would be helpful to finish that. Why do you need to determine that the elevation of that mound?
The reason we determine the elevation of the mound is that the DEP requires 4 foot of clearance between the drip irrigation tubing and the water table at all times. So the mounding analysis was conducted for the water levels that were measured in March of 2022 because they were the highest observed water levels that we had. So we took, as a conservative measure, we took that level, added what was calculated in the mounding analysis to it, and found that we have approximately 8 feet of clearance at the lowest spot where there's mound clearance. It's
Spot where there's
mound clearance,
mountain.
the lowest area of mound clearance. For most of the area, or a good part of the area, the clearance at that time is 15 to 16 feet. So we've got more clearance than is absolutely necessary. And again, that's conservative because that won't happen year round. The water levels fluctuate. They go down in the late spring, summer, and fall. and they're lowest in maybe September, October, and they're highest in February, March.
Understand, so as the water level rises, we call that mounding.
Well, as the water level rises seasonally, we just call that a seasonal high water table.
But for
When
our
you add,
purposes,
you add the mound to it, that is where the water level would occur based on the prediction from the groundwater mounding model.
now, does that affect the depth of the water too? In other words, mounding would be on top? Is
Correct.
there a-
That's why there has to be clearance. What we're looking at is, for example, let me look at a portion of the report with the mounding analysis. And I can give you a better idea. If we look at on figure 4, in area 1, which is the large red rectangle on the southern portion of the site, the mound height is 8.8 feet at the center of the field, 5.5 feet at the down gradient edge, and 0.74 feet at well A6, which results in a mound clearance of 8.2 feet at the center of the field, 8.41 feet at the down gradient edge, and 9.9 feet at well A6. And this is on page 9 of my report.
Okay, and is there any reason that first of all, what's the bentonite seal?
Bentonite seal. Bentonite is a expanding clay
Okay,
that they use to seal off the
gravel?
the gravel pack around the well screen from the surface material.
Okay.
And then there's cement grout put on top with the steel surface casing to protect the well.
And is there any significance, or is there anything at all as why the wells are drilled at different depths? Does it matter if it's 52 or it's 77?
Well, the well screens are supposed to bracket the water table, and you also need enough water to sample and test. So if you're drilling a well and there's less than a gallon a minute, well, it's very difficult to pull a sample, to purge that well and pull a sample,
I'm sorry, to what?
purge the well and collect a sample, unless you have enough flow to do that. So that some of the wells were deeper, just so that we hit water bearing zone that we could sample. You also look at the elevation differences with the wells that are on top of the hill. Those wells are deeper because we're trying to reach a zone similar to the wells on the shallower portions of the site.
Got it, thank you so much.
We have another question over here.
Yeah, hi. I have some questions about the beginning of your testimony tonight to clarify my understanding of what you said. You stated that the preliminary plan had excess acreage or square footage in the drain fields that exceeded the gallon capacity you needed, so therefore you reduced the size of the drain field, right?
Well, there was excess suitable soil. There was more suitable soil than is shown on the current plans. One reason they didn't need as much area, the primary reason though, is that those areas, the water table was too shallow to achieve with the groundwater mounding model the required 4 foot of clearance.
So you stopped using those shallow areas, you cut them out of the
Correct.
plan?
Correct.
Oh, that's why, okay, that
Yeah.
was sort of my second question was you said less than 4 feet, and those areas you deleted from the plan, because you had excess and they were too shallow anyway.
Correct.
Okay, good, thank you. The other part, how do you detect the fracture trace? Is it on the ground surface, or what method do you
A
use?
fracture trace is a linear feature apparent on the ground surface. That typically to identify them, I use aerial photographs. And as I discussed before, stereo pair aerial photographs and a stereoscope to identify where those linear features might be on the surface. And they may or may not correspond to fractures in the subsurface.
I see, but they show on the farm field itself, like a drop or a ridge or something like that,
Yeah,
some sort
the
of
streams,
stream.
the wetlands, they're lower areas. If they're linear, then that would be something I would identify as a fracture trace.
A stream would be a potential fracture trace, you're saying?
Correct.
Okay, the last point I want to make was related to the gentleman's mention of like 300 gallons a day is a typical standard average homeowner's consumption and a discharge, 300 gallons a day? Is that kind of?
How do you mean discharge?
Well, the gentleman brought that up, he Googled it.
I don't know if he,
Well,
You mean what they're putting in their own septic system?
yes.
Yeah, essentially, if they're using 300 gallons, they're discharging 300 gallons. No? Why are you saying no?
No, because there's much evidence of what actual usage is.
Yeah, it's lower than 300 gallons. That's typically what we use for a peak use.
Oh.
And what the DEP requires as far as determining sewage capacity is 265.5 gallons a day.
Okay, so you could ballpark it 300, a little high.
Yeah,
For a four-bedroom house.
yeah.
All right, well, okay, just, so I divided that into 111,000 gallons, and it works out to about 370 homes. If that, I know it's not being, the wells aren't there, but the discharge is there. So it'd be like 370 or more, maybe more if it's less gallons per home per day. 300 or 400 homes discharging is sort of just a way of visualizing the equivalency of the discharge.
Is that a question?
Huh?
I need a question.
Oh. Thank you. I guess that was more of a statement. Thank you.
Can I ask follow-up, just to close out the loop on the mounding? So, I just want to make sure, on your modeling of the mounding, that's what's reflected in your appendix 4, correct? Those are the results?
Appendix 4, let me check.
That's the
Make sure that's
last
the right
3
number.
pages of
Yep.
your report? I think it's called.
Yes, Appendix 4, that's the output from the groundwater mounding analysis.
So that was those 3 boxes that we saw on the previous diagram. You ran the models, and these are the results of what you expect the mounding to be on those, based on the computer program.
Correct. And one of the things that you should be aware of is that when we do long-term analysis, we typically don't see the water levels rise to the level that the groundwater model predicts, because it's a very conservative model. There are a lot of conservative factors that enter into it. So when we do long-term monitoring, we never see the levels rise as high as the model, like I said, the model predicts.
That's all I have, thank you. It's the very end of this report, the very last 3 pages. No, not the pages, the very end of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I don't have any further questions, I don't know if anybody else. No.
Doug, you're witness then, I think, or Mark, you're done, right?
Time and nothing.
No other witnesses.
First witness will be Mr. Michael Armstrong.
Why don't you have him up here, it'd be easier if I just move back.
I would actually, I would actually like him to remain.
Yeah, Mark. All right. She wants to witness over there.
I
In the witness box.
Head of the class.
I'd ask for an offer of proof.
Proof of what?
I'm not talking to you.
The offer is he's an immediate resident, he wishes to express his opinion to the board, and he has some graphic evidence to show as to what he sees in the backyard and experiences.
Oh, yes,
He's not an expert, he's a lay witness.
Be careful with opinions, though.
If you would like me to mark first his written testimony, you can testify to it, and certain pictures
not been sworn in.
Raise your hand. You do solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
And how do you spell your last name again?
Onufraka. It's on you, Frack.
And what's your address?
43 Summerfield Drive. No.
Hard to hear.
Hello? I don't think it's working. It's working. The first thing I'd like you to do, Michael, or Mike, I'll call you, would you come up here and on what we had earlier identified as RPL area map 2, show us where your home is in relationship to the project.
So that's I-7.
Is that I-7?
That's what I have. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this is Summerfield Drive that runs this way. This is my property, this huge piece here. And this is I share a driveway with my neighbor.
Do
So
you have
that is
that-
my property,
Do
right?
you have another map you can mark? This is never.
The aerial photo before it might be a little clearer.
Parcel ID.
And, oh yeah, parcel,
Do you have a parcel ID number? Do you know it? Okay.
We'll get it. I do maybe have it. I'm not offering it, so it's evidence, but it was a tax map.
that would be better.
It was in,
Yeah.
but this doesn't have anything with parcel IDs.
Just helps better identifying exactly what we're trying to look at.
I can bring it for the next hearing, because we're not
Yeah,
going to
that's-
today.
The address is.
We'll bring that later, but I don't see it. It's 6.27 acres, and I think what is your address again?
43.
Say what?
43.
Yeah. It's a PC show. And you want,
What map is that, if I can ask?
it was an effort to locate again the neighboring properties. It was taken by an engineer, but not certified by them, so I'm not entering it in there.
Okay.
I'm just marking people's addresses on it.
Okay.
So at this point, I don't have it as an evidentiary map.
Yes, 40%.
Okay. So what he is pointing to would be the property that kind of comes to the center of what I'll call the thumbprint on the angle property, and he is to the right side of it and going down to the Summerfield Drive sign on this drawing.
In the southeast, he's located southeast of the subject property.
It's essentially, on the south, to the south, on the east side.
Do you want to mark it?
Well, okay, we can mark this one O. How about we just put an O on it? Now, we can always wash it, clean it off, but that would say O for on the front. How's that? Okay.
Okay, just to clarify, it's parcel ID number D1154-190131.
Did you say that again?
Got it.
D11,
Z or B?
D is in dog,
Or D11,
54-190131.
all right. Thank you, Michael. You want to tell us what brought you and your wife to the area and how long you've been here?
You don't want me to read my statement, just answer your questions?
Yes.
My wife and I, we moved here, we had a house built in 2011. We moved here full-time 2014.
Okay.
Myself, my wife's daughter, and our granddaughter.
Okay. And did you have what is your experience on this property? Is it the wet, dry? Was there other use of the angle farm that caused distress to you and your family?
Yes, in the fall of 2013, we learned that they were gonna apply type B sludge on the Angle Farm. There was a group involved in a lawsuit, we joined that group. The lawsuit, and it ended up, DEP got sued. They ended up, rather than continue, they pulled the permit so that they could no longer sludge type B. However,
I'm gonna object. What happened on the Angle Farm in 2014 is irrelevant.
that's not true. It is relevant.
You have
just
a,
be-
you have
Just
a
because
lawyer.
you think
You have
it's
a
not
lawyer.
relevant doesn't make it irrelevant.
You have a lawyer.
It's relevant.
I've objected on the basis of relevance to what we're here for tonight.
What relevance does it have regarding the sludge?
We ultimately, when we get into legal arguments as well, believe the concerns about future damage and the potential for future damage is real and will have a significant impact not only directly on their lives but on their property values. And we will, through our experts, show the potential for that likely impact. And
But what impact does the former sludge issue have on this proposal?
well, apparently odors, water, vapors, something from that project caused great distress and illness to his wife and exacerbated.
Right, but we,
And
You
so
can't-
that's a different project, but the concern is that if there are breakouts of material, this is.
I object to this now. Now Mr. Blazy's going to testify, and this testimony is merely to inflame.
we're bordering on testimony that I think that could only come in through an expert. Because I don't think there's anybody that's been qualified to testify that this drip irrigation system will have any impact on anybody's health, including Mr. No offense, Mr. Onufrak, including Mr. Onufrak. Now, there may be suspicions about that, but I don't think he's qualified to testify about that. I don't think you're qualified to testify about that, obviously, Mr. Blazy. So I think you'd need an expert to testify about the effect that this would have. And I'm gonna sustain it with respect to the sludge. I don't know where we're gonna go on that as far as relevance, but I think you need expert testimony here, no?
Of course you do.
We will have expert
Okay.
testimony, and we will discuss with the family whether they wish to bring the physicians or simply, we have physicians' reports, but we may have to bring them as witnesses, and that's a difficult part. I think what I'd like to do is have Mr. Onufrak talk to you about the pictures he's taken to show the relationship of this property to the farm, what they see out in their backyard, and the water that is obviously visible, and I believe the stream that Mr. Clark referenced, and how it looks when it rains. So-
Okay, I think that's perfectly
So let's
acceptable.
do that, and
to go through
I
that.
think we need, somebody's gonna help Mark, would you mind? Let me explain what I'm proposing to do with these photographs. You're going to see shortly both these photographs.
I'm going to object. You put your witness on, put your exhibits on, stop testifying.
I'm not testifying.
You are.
Well, you won't let me testify.
Go ahead, Mr. Blazy.
I don't have these photographs in the same order necessarily that they appear on the screen. So what I'm suggesting is we take a moment when you see the screenshot to find out of these five, which is the one you're looking at.
All right,
There's
so-
all the number, I'll put it up. They don't have a number that I'm aware of.
But all of the photographs that you intend to show on the screen are in this packet?
Yes,
Okay.
and the photograph.
And what are we gonna mark these collectively as one exhibit, or what are you gonna do?
I would say one exhibit.
I-8,
Okay. Will you just make a note so I know it's at I-8?
Do I get a copy?
Yes, you do. Maybe not. You might want to testify about it.
alright, so just so the record's clear, there's 6 total photographs? You have the,
I think they're five. We'll find out.
Six. I don't know what to show off.
Well, the six, one of them is an eight week, it wasn't in charge. You'll see. I deleted that. Is everyone have one, the reporter? Someone as well?
No, but I'm fine.
Chad, did we decide it's five or six?
It's 6 total in my packet. Maybe,
I sorted the paper stuff together, that's all I have to say. I believe they're five, they're five.
yeah, you have 2 of the same, it's only 5.
So one of them is the duplicate that's of lesser quality. Okay? Let's just start with this one, and that's the photo that matched. If you want, we could then, the clarity say, colon A, B, C, D, make it clear
Yep,
in the record.
I'll do that as we go.
Okay? This one then would be IA.
Can you use the microphone, please?
IAA. And Michael, can you tell us, first, when you took this photograph? And I know you needed to refer, just show all the parties what you're referring to find the date, so you know where, because the date is not on this.
No, I have it on my photo, it's March 23rd of this year.
Okay? And kind of what portion of your property is it, and why did you take it?
Where the grass is my backyard that's been cleared. The rest of it is just the wooded area that goes back to the Angle Farm. Where my property ends is where the Angle Farm begins.
Can you see the Angle Farm through the cleared trees?
It's not that clear on that one.
Wait, do you own the wooded area?
Yes, I do. I own 6¼ acres.
Exactly where the property line is not shown on this, isn't it?
No, but all these trees are, that just wasn't clear. They're all on your property.
Correct.
And the water that's on there is your property.
Where the water is my property, correct.
And what I think, what's your last name, Mark? Mr. Mark, what Mr. Mesker with the arrow was pointing to what appears to be like a green field behind the trees. Is that to your understanding the Angle Farm property?
That is.
And was this taken, was it raining now, or when did it?
No, it had rained a couple of days before. It was not raining on March 23rd.
Okay. Would you then take the next picture? Oh, Mark, Mr. Mesker, I'm sorry for that. See, that's the, I think the duplicate that wasn't as clear. Okay, so that shows the corner of the.
Wait,
roof.
can we mark that? Give it a number?
I8B.
And when did you take that picture?
I gotta find it first. I believe that's this one.
Yep.
I believe it was January 26th of this year. It was either January 26th or the 13th.
Of January, possibly. And it appears to me,
Objection.
I'd like you to orient us to the first picture. Is this to the right or the left, if you will, of I-8A?
Well, it's actually to the right, you can see the bush on the lower left-hand, on the left side in this photo, and it's in the middle of the previous photo. So this picture is to the left of the previous one.
No, further to the right. Don't you mean?
To the right.
It's further to the right. The second one. I-8B is turning slightly to the
Yeah,
right.
I'm sorry, you are correct.
And where, can you point out the angle, where the angle farm
You
is?
can see the angle farm. If you look through the trees, it goes from green leaves, and then it's like a light brown tan, that's the farm. And you can actually see the elevation.
Yeah, and is it your understanding and view that that is a higher elevation than your property?
Yes.
And is-
I have walked to the back of my property when it was being farmed, and you can see, clearly you can see the elevation.
Now, is there any depression between your backyard and where the angle farm appears to be going upward? Is there a stream channel or a wetland area back there? Or is-
Well, the wooded area is wetlands. You see puddles. This whole area is muddy, is soft. If you walk back there, you squish. That whole area back there is wetlands.
Okay. Let's take the next photograph. Mark, if you would.
That was the first one.
Yeah.
It looks like a duplicate.
That's the second one.
No, that's the one yeah, that's the roof.
Yeah, we just,
No, not yet. Let's just finish with the pictures. So you clicked on all the pictures? Let me just, Mark, I'm sorry, Michael, would you find a picture that has apparently a little red birdhouse or some marking on a tree? All of you have that one, I believe.
I'm sorry, Doug, would you repeat that?
There's one with a little red
Yeah, it looks like.
label or
Right
something.
side of the photograph, yes.
Yeah, this one.
So that appears in two.
Well, the one I'm talking about right now is the one with the red mark on the right side. There's one with the same tree but to the left side.
Has that metal, what is it, a lawn ornament of some sort?
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, I see one with the lawn ornament.
the tree to the right has a little red, looks like a little,
Oh, yeah, right.
little bench.
A little chair, and it has a
Are we
metal,
marking that?
yes.
I-8C.
And when did you take that? And that one also has this steel, some kind of sculpture
Yeah.
or form in the bottom. Right, okay. So that's I-8C. When did you take that picture?
I don't have that picture, the one with the date on it, in front of me. But these pictures were taken either in January of 2024, and I think a couple were taken in March of 2024.
We'll be back. Why don't we try to get the date, but let's leave that. Does this show at all the stream, or are those just, again, more puddles in the
No,
background?
it just shows more puddles.
Okay. And can you see the Angle Farm again in the far back?
You can barely see it.
Okay. The other, let's go then to the video.
The what?
The video, yes. So I have that on a flash drive for the stenographer and for you, Mark, where we'll show it, and then I'll hand out the flash
All
drive.
right, just, hang on, just so we're clear, we're gonna mark the video as I-9.
I think that would make sense, yes.
So are we gonna have two exhibits in I-8, H and I?
Yeah,
Let-
right now, we've only
Run
marked
through,
the
at least finish marking the pictures?
Yeah,
I don't care in which order.
All right, so I'm just gonna go, so the photo that does not depict any grass is all wooded area. Does everybody have that one?
Yep,
I'm gonna make that I-8D.
I-8D,
D, yes, D is in dog.
okay.
And then the last one, which is mostly wooded area, but there's a little bit of green grass at the bottom, will be I-8E. That's that. Just generally speaking, and if you want to clarify which dates specifically that they were written, he's indicating, the witness is indicating that that was taken on January 20, I-8E was taken on January 26, 2024.
20,
Which one, I'm sorry?
E,
E.
on 24, January 26, 2024.
correct. All of these he's indicated have been taken either in January of 2024 or March of 2024.
Correct.
All right, so the back
So
of the video.
before we start to show the video, why don't you tell us when you took it, Michael? and where that
Actually,
stream-
my wife took that from the bedroom window upstairs, second floor.
Okay.
This was after, I believe, one day we had torrential rain in July of this year. I'm sorry, July of '23. And the stream that Mr. Clark talked about, that flows from the Angle Farm, and it goes through my property, between my driveway and there's a wooded area you can see, and on the other side to the right of that is a retention basin. So that stream runs from, like I said, from Mangles Farm, and it goes all the way to my driveway. I have a shared driveway with my neighbor. And that thing is so full, you can see the water overflowing on the sides.
Can we see what you're talking about?
Yes, go ahead, show it, run it. You can see how quick it's running on the right side. Correct. It's flowing, yeah. You can see that where it stops, there's a drain that goes underneath the driveway.
So that's a drain culvert, a creek
Yes.
under the ground, okay.
And, you know, you walk across the driveway, you can see it where the water's coming out onto the rocks, and then it continues on, and as Mr. Clark said, it empties into the Delaware eventually.
All right, but that video is being taken from inside the house.
Correct,
And that shows the water running away from the house.
correct.
Is it the same side as the other photos, or the other side of the house?
Well, that's in the front of my house.
Okay.
All of the pictures were back,
The opposite
back,
side.
correct,
The opposite side of the house.
correct. It's only 30 seconds, so.
That drain was put there for a stormwater management plan, is that
I-
for the building or?
Was there when I bought the property.
Okay.
You'd have to ask LPS.
Thank you, Mark. And I believe it's properly loaded onto this stick. If you can't pull it up that way, try it again. fine, how's it?
When it rains heavy, you could see in the photos how wet the property gets. I have walked to the back of my property when it wasn't raining, and you can see the water coming up from the ground, from the leftover rain, which is why I'm here objecting to it, giving them a special exception. I think they'll only, my opinion, is they'll only make my situation worse.
And that's your concern. When you say you see water coming up from the ground, what do you mean? You actually see bubbling and
Yeah.
moving?
Yes, you can see the water literally coming up from above the surface.
You're talking about from the wetland area?
Yeah.
Correct. That whole area that where the trees are is wetland.
Yeah. And I just want to make sure that that's the area you're talking about.
Yes. Even in one of the pictures, where you can see the green, the grass,
At the end, yeah, I see.
it's wet. And like I said, a lot of it's just the rain, heavy rain, but I think putting 100,000 gallons of water onto that property behind me is only gonna make this worse. Since I'm not allowed to give my opinions,
There's no question on the floor. Please direct the witness to stop his speech.
Mr. Armstrong, please, just wait till Mr. Blazy asks you a question.
Is there anything else you would like to say that at least worries you about this project? That you'd like the board to know are your concerns as a resident of the township?
I'm concerned about the potential for loss of value of property. Now, Mr. Kaplan had Mr. Eber testify, and he was asked his opinion on property values with the drip irrigation field, and he gave his opinion. There are conflicting opinions.
I'm
In my
going
opinion,
to object to this testimony.
I-
He's not an expert.
I think he can testify that he has a concern about the loss of value.
He already
He
did that.
I think that's one of the
Okay.
concerns.
And we
I'm
want
also
an expert
concerned
on
about the
that.
health of my family.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
Yeah.
interesting, the question to Fred was on cross, not on direct.
You want to explain when the health issue arose and whether it is gone away once that disposal project ended?
Objection, you've already been told that that's not relevant.
There hasn't been any testimony presented, at least from you, and I'm not saying it doesn't exist,
It'll come.
that this will be, exactly, and that's all I'm saying. Yes.
As you said, I'm not an expert I'm not an engineer, I'm not an expert in
Okay,
soil
no
science,
speeches.
I'm not an expert in water.
Objection.
Why? What's to object? I'm not an expert.
You're just
Okay,
sitting here
okay.
making a speech.
All right,
There's
all
no
right, all right,
question
all
on the
right.
floor.
All right. Anything else?
I don't think I have any
Yeah.
other questions.
Hang on. Anything else from you, Doug?
Do you have any separate items or concerns you want to express to the board before we desist?
Well, it's only gonna be my opinion.
We'll just take a moment to see if there's anything else you want to cover, and if you don't, we'll terminate.
Well, here's a question for you, since you're the attorney. Am I allowed to make a conclusion about their request for a special exception?
Probably not, the way you phrased that, but. The way you phrased that, I would suspect that it's probably not
They're
permitted,
advocating
but,
for a special exception.
correct,
I'm sorry, what was that?
They are advocating for a special exception.
correct.
It is, the drip irrigation field is not permitted in an R1 residential zone without a special exception.
That's
Correct.
the relief
Am I
they've
correct?
requested, that's the relief they've requested, yes.
It is permitted in zones I-2 and I-3.
Okay. Mr. Blasey has made that argument, I think, already, so we understand.
Can I ask Mr. Horn a question?
No.
Question?
No.
Okay.
All right.
I'll ask you after
Art,
the
just
hearing.
stay there. Michael, just stay there, see if anyone
Oh, you gotta stay.
has questions for you.
I have a question.
Hang on.
I do. Mr. Onufrak, you bought the property, you said, 6 years ago?
No, I had the house built in 2011, 13 years ago.
And when you bought the house, was the wetlands behind your house and the woods there?
Oh, I'm sure.
I have no further
I'm
questions.
sure.
Mark, just there was the confusion in that, Michael, you built the current structure or you bought the house that was there?
I bought the property and I bought the plans for the home, and I had a house built on that whole piece of property.
Any questions?
No, I don't have any questions.
I'm just going through procedure, sorry. Any other, party status individuals that have any questions for Mr. Onufrak? Okay, board, go ahead.
Have you measured how far your house is to this 22 acres in question?
Well, no, to be honest, no. My guess is it's about 200 feet.
Objection.
200 feet. I can make it.
Objection.
Okay, I measured it. It's 200 feet.
Hang on, just so I'm clear, the question was distance from the house to the wetland area?
No, to the disposal field in question.
To the property
To
line,
his home,
to the property line.
to his house.
To the building.
Yeah, but I'm saying from the house to the angle, the subject property line.
No,
No.
because
Disposal area,
it's the disposal area.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you measured it, do you know?
I do not know.
Just wondering.
Do not know.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question for Mr. Kaplan for the plot. Is there a diagram that would answer that?
I was just looking.
Yeah, just on that one, but I couldn't see a distance for
No, the house is not on any of the plans. I'm looking to see,
or parcel line maybe?
We'd have to.
Parcel line or something?
To answer the question with integrity, we've got to do a measurement. I think you can see where the property line is in relation to what we believe is the proposed plan. That could be measured, but exactly where the house falls on the property.
I just got a Google photograph of the scale, it does look about 200 feet.
how do you know where the 22 acres?
You can see the
If
tree
you-
line.
Hang on. You can't testify, number one, okay? You shouldn't be looking up Google stuff in the middle of the hearing. Okay, you shouldn't be doing that. Number two, if you're going to measure this or estimate this in another way, do that and come back.
Oh, really? Well, it's certainly, the drip area is removed from the common property line by some number of feet. I have no idea. Well, let me see, this is 1 inch equals 120 feet. This is at least 5 inches, maybe 6 inches off the property line.
I object, you can't guess like
That's why I said there's a
Wait.
diagram in the exhibit.
Here's the wetlands.
I'm gonna object to council testifying about.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, you can't testify, but like I said, if you wanna measure, I mean, this is,
That's why I wanted to know if there was an exhibit, a
Right.
diagram
I
that
don't
specifically
think we have.
said. That's all.
No, I disagree with that. If this is the wetlands down here, and this shows the
Yes, but I
stream,
object to you testifying
Yeah, you
about
can't
what
do
that
it.
diagram displays.
well, then you measure it.
I don't want to measure it.
Somebody asked us to
You need an expert,
He's-
engineer,
he's-
someone
I mean,
qualified to this.
hang on. I mean,
Is that scaled?
Yeah, there's a scale one.
But my concern all along, and why I asked for these other drawings, is this whole application has been about their site and nothing in relation to it. So we don't see the homes, we don't see the other streams and wetlands where they fall off the property, so that you can orient
well,
yourself.
let me ask this, how many feet from his house to his property line that would be in the area of the Angle Farm is that? how many feet is that from his
Well,
house to the
we're
property?
gonna have to either get an engineer or survey the measure.
You have to get somebody out there to do it.
Take us. with
No,
the
it should have been prepared if that's the testimony that they want to give.
No, that's a question we weren't prepared to
All right, all right,
answer.
all right. Hang on. Any other questions for Mr. Imufrak? I want to let him down.
I have a question for the gentleman, or not a question, a statement. He's very concerned about the value of his home and property if this goes in, according to what he said. And I'm gonna bring up something that I brought up at a previous meeting, maybe he wasn't here.
No, I was here. I heard you.
And-
Hang on, please.
And I can
I was not asking a question.
tell again, that the World Equestrian Center in Ocala, Florida, has its own treatment plant and a drip irrigation system with multi-million-dollar homes wrapped around it.
Who cares?
And
It's residential?
I don't see how
Residential
drip,
waste?
pardon me?
Residential waste or industrial?
Residential, yeah, residential.
This is not a residential.
All right.
drip
Listen.
irrigation.
Jeff,
I'm talking about your house.
Jeff, do you have a question?
My question is, do you feel that your house would lose value if the drip irrigation field goes in?
That's the question.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And when our real estate expert testifies, he'll justify my
Okay,
opinion.
all right. What?
I didn't say it.
Oh, no, he was looking at me like,
Maybe he needs to be paying attention to what's going on.
oh. That's it for Mr. Imufrak? Yes?
I'm sorry?
That's it for Mr. Imufrak?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Imufrak.
Yes.
Yes, okay, so there is gonna be an expert.
Yeah, he said that, yeah, that's fine,
We'll get
that's
to
fine.
our experts, we're just trying to lay the base for all of those experts, which we're good.
All right, are you okay, it's 9:45 now, are you okay calling it now?
Yes.
I mean, it would seem like a good time. Okay, just hang on here while we figure out dates for next year.
The one date that would be extremely awkward for me would be June 20th. I'm a Rotarian and I'm at Garofality for months and I'm the honored guest at this thing, and if I don't show up, it's
All
fine.
right, Tina's got to go look what's available here, so just hang out for a second. Yes. What's that?
The pictures can
Actually, it's up and down the block. The sewer treatment plant's over here, and it goes out in an area. Major drip irrigation.